Hey guys, it's Alexander Williamson here with The Secret History, Living Inside Your Aquarium. So on this channel, we talk about more than just species of fish and plants. We talk about the way the hobby is impacted by the world at large. That is the idea, is to examine the world outside of our aquariums and to see how other factors than what we would normally think of may impact our hobby. Now, I can't think of a much bigger issue than what has happened over the last 9 months. Since this thing started, at the beginning, I had a video where I talked about how you may want to stock up. We don't know what supply lines will be going out and so forth and so on. Honestly, we could be in for more. Historically, in 1918, 1919, the Spanish flu, the second round was far worse than the first. And we have kind of just exited the first, sort of, depending on where you are in the world and in the United States. But first, before we hop into the meat and potatoes of this video, I just want to say that I do not mean to minimize any suffering, death, or illness that anybody has experienced due to this. My heart goes out to you if you and your family have been impacted by this awful unfolding event. But this being an aquarium-based hobby channel, I want to talk about how this thing has unfolded and some of the effects that we've seen, that my friends who own shops, that my friends who import and things like that, how they've been affected thus far, and from reasons, everything from literally we were shut down and people could not go out and shop. So, that impacts the bottom line. How do you pay your rent when you can't buy or sell anything? To postal slowdowns, which, or being too busy, not having enough planes going back and forth with normal passengers, which usually carry parcels and overnight fish and animal and plant deliveries. All of this has a major immediate effect in the countries that you're talking about, let alone things like who is going to staff fish farms. Are the fish farms even running? Do they think that there's going to be someone to sell to? Did they get scared at the beginning and did they cull or actually kill a bunch of their fish thinking that there wouldn't be a market to sell to in several months? So we're going to jump into some of these things, and we're going to kind of think about a little how this is going to impact us from the way it already has, and that going forward, to also some of the things you may not expect, and some of the ways this could be changing our hobby permanently. So this is all just a surface look, and it may be different where you are. I've talked to people in Florida and Louisiana who don't have a shortage whatsoever of certain things, but they're right there next to the wholesaler. So if the wholesaler only gets 10% of their normal supply and they can sell it with less transportation cost, or they don't have good transportation at their disposal, then oftentimes it's going to go more locally than shipped across and having extras that can be sold at a price that's low enough that then can get resold several stages. So, there's things like that, whereas here on the West Coast, we're seeing a lot of Japanese fish, which usually we don't see a ton of rice fish. But I know a lot of people who've imported them this year because we've been able to, and some of the other Japanese bulk raised species of aquarium life has not been as popular. And honestly, like ADA Amano, Aqua Design Amano, companies like that, or Hikari, a lot of the Japanese-based companies are not really able to manufacture things in quite the same way that they have been able to. So the product supply line has been impacted as well. And so we may see things like Hikari with foreign labels on it being imported for domestic use in the States, even though it was being saved up for use in Japan or in China or wherever it may have been heading. So I have actually noticed that twice now from local non-chain fish stores. Now the big chains, they are also being impacted, but it may be less noticeable unless you're really into the hobby at a level where you're always going and checking for new species and things like that. But the big box stores are definitely feeling it too. And it's actually surprised me how they've handled it with the dollar per gallon sale and things. They've been able to keep doing that, even though we've actually seen the fact that 2.5 gallons, 5 gallons, and 55s, even some 40 breeders, a lot of these are kind of factory assembled on an assembly line. There's automation, but in the end, a lot of it has to be glued together by hand, and you can see which tanks are, which ones are clean silicone versus which ones are kind of sloppy and just slapped together. But the dollar per gallon sale still happened, and the last one that did happen, I noticed in June, I believe, that they ran out of 40 breeders right away. They ran out of all the big size tanks at the big box stores, and the 2.5s and the 5s were gone. Well, it's because of that hand labor. Also, there's a shortage on glass too right now, just because everything from the mines that get the silicate and the sand from the actual earth, that was shut for several months. Then that reopens, and maybe fish tanks aren't the priority, you know? And this is just one little example. But then you get into higher end products, luxury goods, and unless there was a backlot supply of them, so companies like Ultim Nature Systems or AFA or ADA, Do Aqua, things like that, you're seeing that the rimless tanks, the low iron, high quality glass tanks, lily pipe tubes, things like that, are just not coming in. Once they got through the supply that they had, that was that. So let's go back a little bit again. We're going to hop through some of the regional areas and what is affected, but we're not going to take a super deep dive. You can join me in a live stream coming up for that. We'll go ahead and do that there, but I just want to kind of warn you guys, talk about some of the big changes. You know, another big change before we get into that is that now I am able to raise nano fish at home, and for neon green or neon blue tetras, I'm able to get $5-6 a fish, where that's a 99-cent fish or $2 fish at the pet store normally. And it's because they basically, in Southeast Asia, they have open pond farms, and a lot of them didn't think that there would be a market or the ability to sell them, so they never placed orders from, or they never received orders from big suppliers like Seagrist and things like that, when they didn't know what was going to happen in another 3 to 6 months. And when you raise fish commercially, you have to hatch the eggs, grow out the fry, and then, you know, you get a certain age fish, and depending on that species, it can take a while. Now, with wild caught, that should boot up quicker, but the supply line a lot of times is not as sophisticated. With neon tetras, for instance, or cardinal tetras, now we can see those bred in Florida somewhat, so that helps. There's some redundancy in the line. But when we get to something like pea puffers, there's a few people breeding them, but for the most part, they're usually wild caught. Same with celestial pearl danios, erythromicrons, you know, you name it. There's lots of different fish that are that way. And so what this does is then it causes those locals, however their country has been handling it, could be at a completely different time than ours. South America was hit by this months after we started dealing with this. India as well, which is kind of surprising, but that's how it happened. Europe kind of was hit a month before us. We saw it coming. And China a month or several weeks before that even. So let's hop back through that, but I just wanted you to understand why some of these things have trickle-down effects that are half a year out easily. You know, that's why you're not seeing so many pea puffers right now. And then we have the issues that, you know, we always have to deal with this in this hobby. You know, there's trade wars between the US and China. There's tariffs that raise and lower prices, and it makes sense for little businesses to import or export. And all those variables are always changing. And, you know, you could get into that with every little piece of the hobby. But at the end of the day, it's just, it has to make sense. There has to be a demand, and then there has to be the supply for the demand. When there's not, the prices go up. And I don't know where you guys live, but here in Seattle, I've seen prices go up quite a bit on a lot of fish species. And the other part of that is that I think a lot of fish store owners are trying to recoup the money from when they hadn't been open for months on end in a lot of cases. And a lot of them have had a moratorium on having to pay their lease or their rent, and that is coming due or has come due. It depends on the state. Here in Washington, they've got till the end of the year, but we have people who have not been paying it, and they have this back rent. They need to make up for that, and paying employees and benefits or whatever they offer. It really depends on the business, but it can have a huge impact. So let's keep chugging down the line here. We're pretty much halfway through it. That's kind of the overview from 10,000 feet up. But let's get down closer to landing and discuss how this kind of unfolded. So back in January, February, we started to see some of industrial China shutting down, Wuhan. We know that started to slow down, and that it's a big city for producing all sorts of stuff, whether it's computer chips or it's steel or it's consumer goods, industrial goods. They make it. It's a giant city, and China is all about producing things, making things made in China. We see that a lot here in the West, in the United States, Canada, Mexico, and so does Europe as well. So that started, and lots of people were just simply not going to work. So there's a delay there. Then after that, we don't allow flights in and out. So while this is going on, you see other places like Hong Kong, English-speaking Hong Kong, shutting down. They're a giant exporter of fish. So when you look at the world's top exporters of fish, producers of ornamental freshwater fish, that is, you're looking at Japan, Singapore, which is a city-state just like Hong Kong, and then you've got the Czech Republic, you've got Hong Kong, you've got Brazil, Argentina, Indonesia, the Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand. It kind of all that shifts a bit, those other spots, and that shift that's going on is actually starting to include new places. And part of that is socioeconomic and political things. If you're on or near the equator, you don't have to pay for heat. You may have fresh water that's ready to go with the little nutrients and flora and fauna that baby fish need to eat. You have mosquito larvae and things that just land in your pond, and that bugs the bugs that they can eat and live off of. So traditionally, that has been the cheaper place. Labor is cheaper. The cost of living is cheaper. You use less electricity. You don't need sunlight to go grow the plants. Same within Florida in the United States. We can't compete indoors in the northern United States for free sunshine, cheaper real estate, things like that. So these places have become specialized in what they're good at. Now, Hong Kong is a very densely packed area, so it doesn't make sense for them to be growing plants or big fish necessarily. They need to have big dollar items. So you see things like arowana, koi, goldfish, shrimp, caridina shrimp, and we are not seeing a lot of those exports that normally we would. On top of that, this worldwide health issue has really put extra stress on relationships. There's been conflicts on the border between India and China. There's been conflicts between Hong Kong and China. I don't want to get into arguing whether Hong Kong and China are part of one another or, some combination of that, or if it's a territory. That's up to the viewer to decide. But same with Taiwan, and the same with that relationship. Taiwan actually locked down in March, and they were able to prevent most of the virus. So they have been producing caridina shrimp, the very high quality shrimp, neocaridina shrimp, babaltis, some of the nano fish that are higher end, and some of the flower horns, things like that. Both Singapore and Taiwan have been able to stay on top of that. However, the market has also kind of, that luxury market, except for the very, very rich who don't really care no matter what happens with the economy, has kind of fallen out. So the middle class American who might have been able to afford that, or the upper class Southeast Asian citizen who could afford that, might not be thinking about buying fish when they're trying to decide if they're going to be able to pay their mortgage or their rent or, whatever that may be. So that has also impacted demand, and a lot of this was a preemptive worry that demand wouldn't be there, and so they shut down supply. And then in other cases, the demand is still there more than ever, but the people aren't able to create the supplies. So the demand has just stayed there. So, of course, in a capitalist society, we are going to fill in that wherever we can. So we've always had issues with things like that. And for years now, we've had issues with Africa, for instance, the Congo region, a Central African Republic, and Sierra Leone, Liberia. These are areas that have had war many, many times over the last few decades. Rwanda, Sudan, South Sudan. So some of the puffers, some of the Congo tetras, things like that are easily caught there for a cheap price. They have very specific transshippers on the ground that then ship them out either to Europe or to America, wherever they may go. But if it's not safe for them to collect those fish, or if those transshippers don't even have electricity because nobody's manning the power plants, or there's civil unrest, and the infrastructure's down and there's no flights coming or going from there, then they may still have access to those things, but they can't get them. So that's where places like Vietnam, Indonesia, and Thailand over the last 20 years really have risen to the occasion. In the 1960s, 70% of our fish, which weren't wild caught, were raised right here in the United States of America. That's not the case anymore, and because of that, we have a global aquarium hobby, which has also brought us all sorts of new species. But speaking of that, another country that really was hit was Italy, right after China and Asia. South Korea was hit. They also do produce things for the hobby, whether it's microchips in things like high-end lights, Fluval lights, or diodes and things like that for LED lights, for coral reef lights and things. A lot of these parts are interchangeable. They're made in mass factories, but they're used in multiple products. They produce, only so many types of LED diodes. There may be 20, and then there may be 500 products that use different variants of those diodes. So that's another thing to consider, is that they might have to source different parts. It's not up to quality, so they don't want to sell it. All these things are playing into why we're seeing this very different landscape right now. When I go to the store and I want to get something special ordered from Japan or Twin Star, they have to order it from China, transship it to Japan, then they transship it to San Francisco, and then they ship it to Seattle. And that's Seattle, a big city. If it needs to go out to another city in Washington, there's another step on the ladder. So things are getting more expensive. And, so Europe gets hit, Italy gets hit. There's everything from Dennerleigh in the Netherlands. Also, they have another giant farm they're starting up in Vancouver, up in British Columbia, outside of Vancouver, where they are growing aquatic plants, and they grow them above ground. They're growing them in greenhouses, but they're taking the bet that Canada is worthwhile and will have a market for their plants. However, this is just getting started, and so we're starting to see some market penetration from there, some coming over from Europe, but a lot of the tissue culture plants are actually inoculated in either Eastern Europe, Bulgaria, or former Soviet areas, I should say. So former Yugoslavia, so that Romania, the Czech Republic, Chechnya, Bosnia, Herzegovina. These places, Turkey, they have a lot of small labs that actually do work, whether it's tissue culture or even breeding certain fish too. Like I said, the Czech Republic breeds a lot of specialty pistos, a lot of specialty angelfish, and these get sold to massive distributors in the US. And right now they're working with more of their bread and butter stock that they have in mass amounts that they know are there, rather than their specialty stuff, because they don't know if the market would be there. And so we've seen that. So right now, trying to find tissue cultures of, Crypspiralis red tiger or pink flamingo is near impossible. I challenge you today to go out there on the internet and try to find it. So this may not be a big deal to a lot of hobbyists that are shopping at big box stores, but to someone who loves plants specifically, that's a huge deal that they can't get over half of the plants they're used to having access to for aquascaping and so forth. So Italy gets hit, France gets hit. You've got companies like Fluval, you've got Dennerlay, you've got lots of different companies that are trying to assess how they can weather this storm, and also still any publicly traded companies have to still try to maintain the bottom line. So they're laying off employees, and then if they need them back, and all of a sudden there's a demand that they realize, well, it wasn't so bad, there's still a lag time, and that's what we're seeing. Also going on is they are the same companies in countries in Europe that will place orders for things like aqua soils and substrates, same within Japan. A lot of this comes from China or Mongolia or India. They get that clay-based earth, and they use that and they fortify it with, minerals or whatever it may be, and that is then turned into things like Fluval stratum and things like that. Also things like dragonstone, oko, or elephant stone, thousand layer stone, things like this are all needing to be mined and found. And pretty much universally, there was some point when things shut down, and it all shut down at different times. So what's happened is locally, people have really been in the last 6 months looking and realizing, because of the internet, unlike other times when things have shut down during wars and whatnot, people have access to information like never before. On YouTube, on forums, wherever it may be, people are learning, I can go out, I can collect my own stones and driftwood. I don't need to pay $75 for this piece of wood, I can trade with other hobbyists in the meantime, and hobbyists are selling back to pet stores more than ever. It's been the best year that all my fish breeding friends have ever had, as far as locally buying and selling fish, because the local stores need them. They're able to sell them for a little bit more, and I hope that this is something that goes forward in the hobby still as a change, that we see the worth of homegrown fish at a low price, that's fair for the grower still, but that's at a low price enough that you can buy it. When we cut out all the middlemen and things, then maybe that can go straight to the fish breeders and so forth. But when that supply line gets disrupted, it's very different. So meanwhile, while the hobbyists locally may be on the rise, things like getgills.com, things like Aquabid, locally sourcing things on whether it's Craigslist or it's, just through online knowing one another, that's a new era. This has only been maybe 20 years that's really possible, and 10 that it's been practical and widespread amongst your average hobbyist. So as we look forward, we really have to see how other countries are going to handle things. Which customs agencies allow what? I mean, right now, Americans cannot go to Europe whatsoever, and Europeans can't come to America without 14 days quarantine. So this is really limiting the flights, which then limits the cargo flights. Now, there are still cargo flights going back and forth. Don't let me tell you there's not, but all these things, this could float around for years depending on what happens with a treatment or a cure for it. It could be another several years of this kind of up and down, things going out of supply, in supply, and us having to learn how to kind of get back to the DIY and making things of the hobby, which was so common at the beginning of the hobby. If you look at my history of the videos, before the 1930s, unless it was high-end luxury Victorian era tanks, It wasn't later until the Euroframe electric metal tanks and the undergravel filters and heating that didn't come until a decent while later, and was not affordable really until after World War II. It was more of a niche hobby that you got into, or you had some goldfish, some bettas, but not the diversity we see in your average community tank. We've become very accustomed to so many species of plants and fish and invertebrates now. So it'll be interesting to see. I've seen more native fish entering the hobby. That would be a great trend to see. More cold water here because we're in the northern hemisphere, and we're not right near the equator. So that may travel over to Europe. Small species of cool water creatures. The other thing is people are living just in general in smaller houses, denser places in the city, and tech has allowed us to do these things, technology. So with that trend happening as the world anyways, rural is moving into urban, we also see that the impact of public health issues can be very severe very quick and shut down whole sectors very quickly. So it remains to be seen, will America start manufacturing all its fish tanks again for that stability? Is it worth it profit-wise? Or will a lot of these companies that do custom things and small things, or maybe they just do it on the weekend and they mix up, whether it's fertilizers or foods, will they just fall away? The other giant thing that's going on right now is, for instance, in India. So they produce a lot of our pharmaceutical chemicals and precursor chemicals for fertilizers, for medications, for industrial uses, you name it. They are the world's chemical producer, as well as with China still too. But these are now, now we see Bangladesh getting into this more too, and Pakistan getting into it as well. Africa is rising in that respect also. So will we see multiple sources of these things? Things like medication for our fish. A lot of people and a lot of stores, also just for liability reasons unrelated to this, don't want to sell antibiotics. They don't want to sell things that humans may ingest, even if they're human grade, for liability reasons. And so now we're seeing things like eucalyptus, like tea tree oil, on the market at places like Petco. And that's another change that we'll see. Where does that supply come from? But humans are going to come first, and infrastructure, buildings, getting things back on track, medical for humans is going to come first, and then the fish will come. So it remains to be seen if there'll be shortages on erythromycin. There is right now. Things like Fluval bug bites right now, that's out. I don't know why, but we can't get it right now in the country. And certain aquariums, certain lights, like I said, all that 6 months, 7 months out from when this started is still just trickling. And we may have had a supply for the first piece. Stores were closed, so they didn't sell enough. But now it's really hitting, and now we have to see who's going to rise. Israel has been breeding fish like crazy, and some African countries as well are trying different aquaculture. They started with tilapia as food, but there are forecasts for them to Tanzania, Algeria, even Liberia, or Libya, I'm sorry, because their economy has changed so much. No Gaddafi anymore. And post-Arab Spring, post all the things that have happened there, they've opened up to the West again somewhat, and if you want to call it that. And they have a very hot climate, and there are a few areas that have fresh water. So they can look at doing that also there, where maybe cost of living is even cheaper than some of the areas where we have assumed it's the cheapest. Those areas have risen out of poverty because of the industry that we've brought there, or that they've built there around these things. And same within the Amazon. So there's tribes, there's local ethnic groups working with people like Project Paiba, and also IBAMA, and different organizations like that, where they try to get the local people to sustainably catch wild fish from their fisheries. Well, we need to have transshippers that can ship them out, stores open that can sell them. Otherwise, these fish die in transit, and you can't just shuffle them around, and they need bulk medicine to be treated. And so we're seeing issues with these things, and it makes us think what parts of the model are sustainable, what do we need to adjust. And I'd love to hear from you guys what you're short on, what you think's coming next, and what parts of our current setup are just logically going to be changing. They won't be from the same sources, or economically it's making less sense. Maybe you've been in the hobby for years. I'd love to hear it. And examples are great in the comments below. If you enjoy this kind of content, like, subscribe. You can join the channel for extra chats, behind the scenes videos, merchandise. I never put my name on the merchandise. It's just art with fish. There should be some Teespring images below, that kind of thing. But if you enjoy this, I'm glad. This is the kind of stuff I like to do here. Take a little broader look at things, and we can do some specific looks later if people seem interested in this video. But I didn't want to get, too laser focused on economics. So I hope you guys are doing well, staying safe, take care of each other, be kind to each other, take care of your critters, the people around you, and of course yourself, or you can't do the rest. So I think if half of us do half those things half the time, our world will be twice as nice. So take care, swim on, and I'll talk to you next time.